Hello and welcome back to the GamesIndustry.biz Investment Summit Online, sponsored by Xsola and Renaissance PR. Next up, we have a special fireside chat with industry legend Emily Greer from Double Loop, hosted by James Batchelor from GamesIndustry.biz. If you have any questions, this is live, so please put them into the YouTube chat and we'll ask as many as we can afterwards. So over to you, James.
Thanks, Jamie. Hello, I'm James Batchelor. I'm UK editor of GamesIndustry.biz, and this is going to be a lovely fireside chat. Hopefully not too fireside because I'm in a slightly flammable location, as you can see. You're going to be hearing as little from me as possible because we're here to talk to Emily Greer. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. I'm also in a flammable location since I'm in California. So yes, let's keep the chat to the maximum and the fire to the minimum.
Fantastic. So if you tilt your camera to the window, do we have full-blown Blade Runner orange sky outside?
No, that was yesterday. It's
Okay.
more of a like slightly yellow, dark fog today, but it's clearly daylight, which is a major improvement. Yeah, it's really disconcerting when it's dark at 11 a.m. and it's not because of a winter solstice or something.
I can only imagine. Let's distract ourselves from from the Californian woes with a conversation about investment and funding from the various different angles that you've approached it. First of all, a little bit of background on yourself, if that's okay, because I imagine most people tuning in probably know who you are, but for those who don't, like, what have you worked on in the past? Where are you now?
Yeah, so I have been in games 14 years. I had a previous career in what would now be called data science and UA in the catalog and e-commerce business, but back then was called direct marketing. And I've only ever been in games as a founder, so it's kind of a weird path. My brother had dropped out of college to work on Ultima 7 and had worked at Origin, had his own studio that failed, and worked at EA. And he had the idea for Kongregate, and I started helping him with his business plan and volunteered as co-founder because I thought it was a great idea and something that would be really fun and exciting to do. So that was back in 2006, and we built up Kongregate.com, which was or still is a kind of like YouTube for games. It's a browser games platform where anybody could upload a game, and we added all sorts of chat and achievements and other things around it, and became and shared revenue with developers, which is actually we were the first people to do that, and in browser games, and it was very popular. We had more than 100,000 games uploaded from more than 30,000 developers. So that ranged from teenagers making their first game to EA and Ubisoft and Supercell were all on the platform. So it was a tremendous education in games to have, especially for a data person like me, to have so much data. We were bought by GameStop in 2010, and then I ended up taking over as CEO and started a mobile publishing business where we helped small independent developers bring their games to mobile with all sorts of services, including marketing and monetization advice. And then we started buying some of the studios that we worked with. So we bought 4 studios in 3 years. And we also were bought out of GameStop by MTG. So I have a weird collection of stuff in which I've been sold the same company twice, which is a weird grind achievement kind of from the entrepreneurial side. And then also bought companies, been a publisher, published more than 50 games, been a platform, and then also even invested in a few companies. So it's sort of a very broad experience, even though it was mostly all at one company. Then last year, I really got the itch to be an entrepreneur again and to start something new, and left Kongregate and started a new mobile game studio with my friend Shelby Moladina. And we're building up a game studio focused on making games for people who don't think of themselves as gamers but play games. Sort of the big mass market on mobile, and that's something we're both really passionate about. So we're excited to do that, and it's fun to be back in the 10 people early energy of a company. It's a special time, and I'm enjoying it.
Nice. Well, let's start with that then, because you've kind of gone back to the start again. You're like starting up a brand new company, small team, like you say. Um, Compare that to when you started Kongregate. That's 14 years ago. That's a long time in any kind of industry, but particularly the games industry, and I guess particularly in like kind of the investment, the financial side. How different was like the funding landscape when you were starting Kongregate compared to when you were starting Double Loop?
It's pretty different, though a lot of the same players are still there. Have talked to a bunch of people who invested in Kongregate, and we laugh about the fact that this was pre-iPhone, that they were all on Blackberries when that happened. The biggest difference is, I would say, is in the rise of the gaming specialist fund. The general VC industry for a long time has uh, um, had sort of a schizophrenia about games investing, because they've seen for years, that it's huge industry, growing consistently. It's tech. It's so close to things that they're good at, and yet they're not very good at judging games, and it's pretty different. So there tends to be these cycles where they're interested, they're not interested, and they gain and lose confidence. When we were raising for Kongregate, we heard again and again, oh, we don't invest in content, but we Kongregate was a platform, so we were able to talk to a lot of games industry investors. In the period kind of 2008 through 2014, there was the rise of Facebook games and early mobile, and a bunch of regular VCs got back into games. And then they were sort of scarred by that and drew back. And what you've seen in recent years is a ton of specialist game funds popping up. London Venture Partners, which is one of our investors, is sort of the oldest one of this and most established. But now there's 10 or even 15 game industry focused funds interested in specifically investing in games, and that's just a totally new world compared to what it was in 2006, 2007.
Nice. Let's build on that then. Like, as you say, like nowadays there are many more kind of specialist games investors, specialist venture partners. There are also different kind of routes to, at the risk of going on a tangent, there's different routes to investment. So things like, crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is a form of investment. If you can't raise the capital from a venture partner or a specialist games investor, you can get people to just pitch in the money, the public to pitch in the money for you. Like, there are seemingly more ways to get funded than ever, but does that mean it's easier, or are there other kind of new challenges? Like, what's the biggest challenge of getting funded today, even though there are so many different avenues, I guess?
There's way more investors and it's a way bigger market, but on the other hand, it is also much easier to make games than it was before. There's so many tools that there weren't out there in 2006. Now that's both on the game side, when you look at engines like Unity and Unreal, and sort of the quality of engines that are available to people. It's cloud computing, it's things like PlayFab and AWS and Google Firebase that make games much easier to make. So that also means many more studios competing for funding and competing for the market. So essentially, getting investment and getting funding has never been easy. It is easier to start a studio. I think there's sort of an equilibrium in terms of getting investment. And when you start a studio, and whenever you start any kind of new company, I think it's really important to think about, what are your goals and what do you want? What does success look like to you? Because the best path for fundraising and getting investment to your company is pretty closely tied to that. You always want to be aligned with whoever you're getting money from. There are no free checks, right? Everybody always wants something out of it. And depending on what you want, you're going to be better aligned with certain kinds of sources of money than others. Venture funds are always looking for outsized returns and the really big hits. So, they want Fortnite, they want Supercell, they want things that are going to sell at least have the chance of selling for, hundreds of millions of dollars and ideally billions of dollars. And if you're somebody who wants to make, really beautiful artistic games that are going to be incredibly resonant to a smaller audience and get a lot of critical acclaim and keep a small studio running for a long time, that's not at all aligned with a VC investor. But it may be very well aligned with crowdfunding or working with a publisher or some type of friends and family round. So you just need to know, need to think and talk about it very carefully with your co-founders, because you may assume that you want the same things, but you don't always. That's not always the case. And it's best to have those tough conversations early about what your goals are than to have it, 4 or 5 years in when there's lots of complications.
So I guess how then do you identify like what someone is looking for? Like, so to go back to what you were saying earlier, like when you're back in the day when you started Kongregate, there's like, well, we're not investing in content, we're investing in platforms. And fortunately, you were a platform, so you had more of a chance. Nowadays, like you say, like investors in particular want the big hits. They want the next fortnight. Whenever I come to or host or attend any of these kind of investment-centric talks or conferences, the conversation always seems to be, or the sentiment always seems to be like people are investing in businesses, not in projects. That it's not that people aren't going to invest in a specific game; they're going to invest in a company and their next game, and the prospect of working with them in future. I guess, in today's landscape, like how do you identify what it is they're looking for, and therefore which person is the right person to kind of pitch to, who's going to give you what you need?
The answer is that it's very hard to know that without talking to people, because you don't know what all has happened behind the scenes. There's often they may have talked about certain things publicly, but there's a whole host of other things that they're interested in now, or there's a host of things that they're becoming interested in. So, when in doubt, have conversations and talk to as many people as you can and understand what they're looking for. In general, talking to other entrepreneurs, people who've talked to them, will give you a clearest picture of what is important to a particular firm. Also, other investors, and a big sort of secret to investment is networking and having conversations with all sorts of people and asking questions and figuring that out, because it's really hard to guess, and things change over time. So don't assume, and you just have to kind of keep going. And a lot of times you're not going to be aligned with what a particular firm or particular publisher is looking for. That doesn't mean that your business is not a great potential business, and your game is not a great potential business. It's just not aligning with the things that they've already decided that they want to invest in.
So I kind of echo. So we had a panel yesterday, what not to do when pitching, like worst practices for pitching. And one of the great pieces of advice was like, don't give up. Like just because they've turned you down, like publisher or investor has turned you down for this specific project, doesn't mean they won't work with you on something else in future. I think that's something that was worth bearing in mind for developers. Let's delve a little deeper then. We're touching on it, but I want to kind of delve a bit deeper into the difference between kind of publishers and investors, because you've been on kind of sort of both sides of the fence there. You've certainly got an experience of both sides. Which is the right fit for the studio? And I guess that's kind of dependent on the project, but like, do people need investors or publishers? Which is best?
So, as you mentioned, investors are investing in a company, and they're going to be with you essentially forever, unless you sell. And so you're selling the dream of what the company can be, and it's very focused on the team. A publisher, you are looking at a specific project, and that's a shorter term relationship. It may last for years. It's more discreet. It's very specific, and it is probably a little bit easier to get to a yes, and they're looking at different things. A publisher is going to care very much about, do you have a demo? Do you have a video? Can you show the game? And does that fit into what they're seeing there? An investor is looking at different things. And then an investor is also looking at different things at a different stage. At seed stage, they might just care, is this a great team? Once you're getting into bigger rounds, then they're often going to be looking at, okay, what metrics do you already have? So it's not a simple thing of just this is what they're looking for versus not. Publisher deals, there is, particularly in the PC space, there's way more publishers, and they're much more interested in a scale of project that is smaller. For a VC, if they can't see that path to massive hit, they're not interested. But publishers are often going to be interested in niche hits, and so that's a very important thing to understand and look at while you're when you've got a project, one that is for a smaller audience is much more likely to be a fit with a publisher than a VC.
Okay. There's another source of investment that you were talking about to me about just before we kind of came on live. It's kind of strategic investments from other games companies. So you suggested kind of like Supercell, NetEase, the one that springs to mind, like the mighty Tencent. Tencent has invested in everything. Tencent owns everyone. If you want a piece of that kind of Tencent, I guess why are companies like that investing in other games companies? What do they get out of it, and what does the games company they're investing in, what do they benefit? How do they benefit?
And I think that is very individual to any particular company. I think, somebody like Tencent is quite different from somebody like Supercell. And usually it's good to look at, what they're publicly saying. I think, I do think there's a commonality that they're looking to extend their pipeline of development beyond just building up studios. They're interested in building a relationship with talented studios and talented games, and seeing how they can help them and bring them forward. I'd see they're often sort of in between publishers and investors in terms of they're looking for a little bit of both. Often it is the beginning of a bigger relationship, which might be either potentially M&A, or it could be a strategic partnership in the case of somebody like Tencent or NetEase to bring games into China or some other kind of regional thing. But there's always going to be some different company on exactly what we're looking for.
I can throw a question at you. This literally just come to me. wasn't something we discussed beforehand, but I'm confident you'll because we've got an expert on. So I don't know the stuff I'm going to ask you. How do developers know how much to ask for, and when is enough investment enough? Because we on GamesIndustry.biz, we cover investment stories. The amount of times we come like, right, they've raised this much in seed funding, now they've raised this much in Series A, this much in Series B. Obviously, like far end of the scale, you've got Star Citizen has raised $300 million and still isn't finished, or still is in early development. Like, when is enough investment enough? Like, how much should people be asking for, depending on their project, I guess?
That is a hard question. Some of it has to do with what game are you're building. If you're building an MMO, if you're building something that's going to be, synchronous, massively multiplayer, AAA values, those are really expensive, and you're going to need to raise a lot of money to do it. But for a mobile game, the budget is going to be much more need that. Ideally you want something like twice as much money as you think you really need, because you need both buffer from how long can the buffer on game development is uncertain, there's lots of delays, you need buffer for that. You need buffer for operating a game after it launches, before the money comes in from a publisher, or before you're getting payback on UA. Do you need to spend a lot of money on marketing? The answer is somewhere between way more money than you think you need and the amount of money you can realistically get out of an investor. And you're sort of optimizing between these two things and figuring out what you can do. It's also good to think about it in terms of stages, right? That, as you said, you announce a lot of investment rounds and you'll see, okay, that somebody's raised seed and now they've raised an A. So you may, and this is how I approached this, is I looked at how much money is Double Loop going to need? And I split it between two amounts and then figured out, okay, what can we prove with the first amount to be able to raise the second amount at a higher valuation and with more confidence from investors. So there's not just one amount. This is a little bit of a squirrely answer, I'm sorry, but hopefully it helps the thinking. If it's only realistic that you could get, $500,000 in seed funding, then you need to figure out how to make that work. If you're building Star Citizen and you're going to need $100 million or $300 million, then you also need to figure out how to make that work. If you need more, from the point of view of the VC, it also means that you're probably going after a bigger market and a bigger game. So that is going to line up. The other thing is AAA publishers are very used to games costing a lot. So with that right publisher, you can have a very large budget, one that may even be a little uncomfortable for a VC, but because a publisher really understands the game and the market, they may be comfortable going higher as well as being interested in smaller niche games, because there's that deep familiarity with audience and games and how do you make things a success.
When you're going for an investment, when you're pitching, how important is it to have a kind of an established track record? I asked that because obviously when you were searching for funding for Double Loop, you had the slight advantage of, hey, here's 14 years of Kongregate being really successful. And this kind of proves that I know what I'm doing. But if people are starting out, or perhaps people have come away from something they tried and didn't work out, like... How do they improve their chance? Does that affect their chances of getting investment if they haven't had a massive success beforehand?
Absolutely. And, we were not known when we started Kongregate. So, Jim had a track record in that he had been a tech director at EA. So that gives him some credibility, but that only goes so far. And when you don't have a track record, then one of the big question marks on you is going to be, can you execute your vision? And so every step that you take that shows that is really important. When we started Kongregate, we had a lot of investor conversations that were interested, but nobody was saying yes until October of 2006, when we had our alpha and we released it. It got written up on TechCrunch and we started to get games and developers. And then suddenly we had like 3 term sheets in a week. And we had been building up those conversations, but until we proved that we could do something and we proved that somebody was going to be interested in, it was hard to get that investment. So from a game developer point of view, when I went out to raise my seed, it really, it was, my track record at Kongregate was essentially enough to get investment. For somebody who doesn't have that track record, you're going to need to show a little bit more. And have a demo of the game, have a more complete team, just be a little bit farther along to show that you can execute. It's totally possible, and unknown teams get funded all the time. You just need to clear a little bit more bar, showing that you can actually execute and can actually make things. And sort of along every step, you're going to need to have shown a little bit more than somebody like me who gets credit for a previous company.
Nice. Take a slight tangent here. I believe you have also invested in a couple of companies yourself, not as a full-blown investor. I'll clarify that right now. Like I know you're still very much kind of the entrepreneur side, the publishing side, the development side, but maybe tell us a little bit more about like who you've invested in and why.
Yeah. So I didn't do any investing at all while I was at Kongregate because I considered that a conflict of interest. We were a platform, we were a publisher, and I was not comfortable in investing in other game developers. Since I've left, I have started doing it. Most of that has all come out organically from work I've been doing to mentor and support other women starting games companies. So in a couple of cases, a company called Toya and a company called Glow Up Games, I've been helping them and advising them on various things, and then turn that into putting money in the company, both because I saw an opportunity with that team and what they're going after, and also because I saw a need and where my money could help. So I'm not looking at it from the same sort of investor perspective of somebody who's, said, I'm going to spend, 1 million or 10 million doing X number of angel investments. It's been a little bit more organic. But I think it's come out of relationships, and I think that's not uncommon with investors. Ultimately you are investing in people and teams, even for publishers. But it's even more true with VCs and companies. And so building that relationship and building that trust is really important to getting to a yes and getting to a check.
Cool. Do you have having now invested in a couple of projects and a couple of companies, do you have plans to kind of invest in any more? Is it something you'd like to explore going forwards?
Not right now. Starting a new company is always incredibly time consuming, and it's very important that I not overstretch myself. I do continue to do a lot of advising and mentoring for women in the industry, as I think that's really helpful and important. So I sort of have a certain amount of time reserved for that. And if anybody's interested, you can message me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to have a conversation. But I'm not turning into a full-blown fund. I prefer giving advice than saying no. And any good investor needs to say no a lot. So I'm not setting myself up for that.
Do you perhaps have any advice for anyone who's in a position like you that has a successful business behind them, is starting on the next one, has the ability to invest in a couple of projects, doesn't want to do so like on a long term, like I say, doesn't want to become a fund, but does want to help and kind of give back? Any advice to them in terms of what they should be looking for, and how to know when to say no, that sort of thing?
I think my advice would be to talk to other people who have invested, who have done this. There's quite a few successful founders out there who have done a significant amount of investing. My brother is one of them, but there's quite a few more in the industry. And I would talk to them and get their sort of, what did they know going into it? What happened? What didn't they know? There's no substitute for taking somebody for coffee and having a frank conversation, or in these days, setting up a Zoom call. Talk to somebody who did it. Talk to more than one person who did it. Get several perspectives, and then think about it. I do think it's important to think about, okay, what's your niche? What do you know? What's your advantage as an investor? And have a set thesis when you do investments, rather than have it be sort of higgledy-piggledy.
Fair enough. We don't want anything to be higgledy-piggledy. I agree. You kind of touched on it there, like obviously things are slightly different now. We can't go into meetings, can't meet people face to face. There's no GDC or any events. We're doing a digital one right now. That kind of proves it. Advice for people seeking investment in the current climate, and I'm going to take this from kind of two tangents. One is, obviously don't have to answer them at both at once. Advice for people trying to start a new company in the current climate, like new challenges, things that are more tricky now when everyone's mobility is somewhat restricted. I guess that's the way to put it. And then advice for people who are trying to do these meetings virtually, who are trying to secure investment virtually, because you don't get the same rapport when you're talking to a small webcam mounted up on top of a monitor, do you?
Yeah. So I'll start with the second one, which is, and I think this is just generally good advice in these times, is as much as possible, invest in having a good setup, having a good background, if you need a microphone, using a microphone, working on your light, anything that shows you to the best advantage is worth a little bit of time. Rehearsing and practicing is good, and then also having some conversations over cell, and just when that's possible, have a phone conversation sometimes. It's just a little bit of a break for you and for them. And you have a little bit more of a human connection when you're not distracted by a little image of yourself on the screen. So, but, generally it works. We make it work. And what I would say is that games has very much been a relative winner from this disruption, and despite the economic turmoil, people are spending on games, and it's relatively easy to develop games. So I haven't seen a major chill on games investment. So if you were thinking of starting one, I wouldn't hold back. The climate is maybe not better than it was, this time last year, but I also don't think it's worse. So go ahead and do it. Networking looks a little different and feels a little different, but sort of, asking your friends who have for advice, and then asking who they should, anybody that they could introduce to you that could give you advice, and keeping on doing that and chaining. It was nicer when you could do that over coffee, but it still works over Zoom. And people who have raised money know how important it is to essentially to pay it forward, and are generally happy to help other entrepreneurs.
Lovely, thank you for that. I'm told we've got about 14 minutes until this session ends. So if anybody's watching on YouTube and has questions, please do put them in the YouTube chat. I have many minions lurking in the background who can then pass the questions on to me. One question has come through. What's hot in games with VCs? So people like London Venture Partners, what are they looking for at the moment? Are they still looking for Battle Royale?
I don't think that they are looking for Battle Royale. I think whatever was a big hit 2 years ago is generally not what people are looking for. I think for somebody like LVP and Seed, theme is going to be really important, and then market trends that they see emerging, and that's going to be a little bit different from VC to VC. There are definitely VCs who are particularly interested in the PC market, and really don't want to do mobile. And then there's VCs who see mobile and the so-called casual audience that we're addressing as underserved. So I don't want to generalize for a lot of different VCs. And then my other advice is, you shouldn't be planning your company around what you think VCs want. You should have conviction that's internal about what game you want to make and why, and then you sell the VCs on that. Your passion and authenticity and excitement for a project is going to matter always more than whether they think something is hot. And it's going to be very hard to guess that trend. So as much as possible, do try to ignore what the hot trend is, because it's going to be hard to guess, and you're better off building something unique and really selling people on it.
Thank you. We've been asked another question. How can you tell a good publisher from a bad one?
Mm-hmm. That is a good question. I mean, obviously track record and talking to other people who have been published by a particular publisher is the best way. What have they done? What's been a success? And what has been the experience of the people who worked with them? Do they have repeat games with the same studio? That's a very strong signal. If a team makes one game with somebody and then wants to do another game, you almost don't need to get a reference from them. They said, this was a good experience, I want to do it again. The other thing is to look at, contracts and what they're asking for. If they're trying to push all of the risk and work off of you, onto you, then that's not worth that much. I think especially on the indie PC side, there's quite a few sort of slightly predatory outfits, who want to take a percentage and not necessarily do much work or put up money. And I would, look very, very carefully at contracts. Lawyers may be expensive, but a good one can spot things that are really unfair and out of market, and you should always get contracts reviewed. If you do not have money for a lawyer, then at least reach out to friends and get advice about what terms you should be expecting and what terms you shouldn't be expecting. And if you don't have friends in the industry, then there's resources, community resources like Discords, the IGDA, others. Reach out to other people and get advice.
I'm going to throw in one. Is there something that you wish you had known prior to seeking investment, or prior to so something kind of you wish you'd known that kind of would have helped you in the past, either before starting Double Loop or even as far back as starting Kongregate?
That is a good question. I think I do think that alignment question of what do you want and what do they want, I didn't think about it at the time that we raised for Kongregate. It was fine because we were reasonably aligned. But when I've seen other people, when I've seen it go wrong, it's generally been around that, where you want to do something different than what they want. And that is, I think, the single most important thing to ask is, what do you really want? And what does everybody you're working with really want? And just have hard conversations with everybody early, rather than get deep in and have big fights later. Also, in general, everything takes longer, contracts take longer, M&A deals take longer, everything takes longer. So always buffer whatever forecasting you're doing around cash for things to go wrong and things to be slow.
We've got a good one here. A lot of investors like to see market research, but what advice do you give to anyone trying to show market demand for more marginalized groups such as BAME, LGBTQ, when that sort of data is hard to come by? With a lack of data for that, how do you try and convince people?
This is something that one of my investees is dealing with, a company called Glow Up Games. And, where you can show trends in other media, perhaps not games, of like particular shows or particular categories and how that might connect to games, I think is really strong. I think that, again, anything that you can show sort of interest in, that there is interest in, if you've built up, a Twitter following from example art that you've done, or Injure, or you've got a lively Discord, anything that shows that at least a small number of people are passionate about something, that can help. Anything you can do to show traction with that audience pre-launch, and that's true both with with marginalized audiences or less celebrated audiences, but also with just niche games of any kind, and even popular games. The more that you can show pre-launch that anybody's interested, anybody's watching your trailer videos, anybody's doing that, that always helps.
Nice. I'm going to throw in one last question, if I may. Just your personal thoughts on what you would like to see more investors taking risks on and investing in to kind of help advance and diversify the industry. Like, investors are just historically, they are interested in hits, and the trouble is hits are based on what has already been a hit. So we're all in kind of the same ballpark. Like, what would you like to see more of get more investment?
Yeah, I think that mobile is still underinvested in, given the size of the market and the fact that almost everybody plays games on mobile, that there's more ability to reach more different audiences there. I think there's been a lot of interesting things in terms of, as I mentioned, investors get more interested when you've proven that you can execute. So I've seen things like, Pixels, and some other folks doing sort of seed rounds to help people get small amounts, get kind of prototypes and other things off the ground. And I think that kind of, small investments that help people get over the hump of having something slightly more advanced to show larger investors, is really important. I, I struggle a little bit about how to do it. And how to, and exactly what is the right thing. But I think if you get a lot more people working on it and funding more things that are smaller, then there's more chance of something breaking out. But I have seen a difference. When we were raising for Kongregate, I received a lot of pushback about, and including having some investors say that I was a negative on the deal, and that they only wanted to fund Jim, and a lot of other things that showed that I was not valued as a co-founder, as a female. And then, fast forward to now, my track record and the fact that I'm a female looking at a underrepresented audience is actually, I think, valued and helping me fundraise. Do I think that credit necessarily extends to sort of every new female or otherwise marginalized entrepreneur coming into the door? Not necessarily, but I do think it's at least we've made some progress, and hopefully we can keep doing this. That's part of why I do the mentoring that I do, and I'm trying to help spread that sort of kind of insider knowledge and extend my connections and help people.
Emily, thank you so much for your time this morning. That's been fantastic.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great stuff.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
I'll hand back to you, Jamie.
Thank you to James.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, James. Thank you, Emily. That was brilliant. Really interesting chat there. With some fantastic questions from the audience as well. So thank you both.
Okay. Thank you. And good luck with the rest of the summit. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Emily. That's great. Next up at 8 p.m. UK time, that's 3 p.m. ET and 12 p.m. PT, we have a panel, Next Gen, How the New Consoles Will Change Investment, with a fantastic panel lineup presented by Rebecca Valentine from GamesIndustry.biz. You can view links to all the talks today and those from yesterday on live.gamesindustry.biz. Thanks very much, and we'll see you soon.